Buonasera.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming so numerous at this meeting on infrastructures and transports, new opportunities to come out of the crisis. Well, this sort of subtitle deserves our comment. Indeed, infrastructures are a flywheel for development, but they are also a source of costs. I'm happy to be the chairperson here. I would like to remind you that it's 50 years the first Eurobond was issued and was promoted by Mr. Neri, and it concerned the autostrada, the highways. That was celebrated by the Financial Times because that was the start of the new world. Unfortunately, that method has been forgotten here. In Italy, we used to build infrastructures at that time, but indeed, they are only now getting important as they deserve to be. We have a person in charge of politics, a minister, Mr. Maurizio Lupi, Minister of Infrastructures and Transports. We also have the General Director of the Bank of Italy, Mr. Salvatore Rossi. From the 1st of January, he has also been appointed as a chairperson of the Institute, which controls the sector of insurances, which can have an important role in the financing of infrastructures. But before that, we would like to give the floor to two persons who have gathered a positive experience in the public sector and in the field of infrastructures. First of all, Massimo Garbini, the CEO of ENAV, and he is one of the few examples of a chairperson of an institution in Italy which has gone beyond our borders. And the name of the institution is ENAV.
Grazie della presentazione.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We don't deserve that much, but frontiers for the airline industry, it's automatic. 7 minutes after taking off from Malpensa, we're already beyond the Italian border, so it is more than normal that in the airline industry we become very quickly internet. Thank you very much for being here so numerous. Thank you very much to the Minister and to other guests. It's an honor and a privilege for me being here for this very short testimony that I will conclude with three kind of observation or question that I will ask the Minister and the Director General. Now, as it's been said, transport infrastructure are a driver of economic and social development of our country and of Europe. What is nice about this meeting is that there is so much Europe here and so much readiness to talk about Europe and Euro enthusiasm. The idea is to be completely competitive in Europe and worldwide, especially in a moment like this one. Infrastructure are a vital instrument to overcome the crisis and to develop our economy in the mid and long term. ENAV, my agency, would like to be an ideal example in this complex framework. We are a public society. We've been able to change our industrial approach, reaching levels of productivity and economic productivity and levels of service that are recognized as excellent on the world scene. We've not made it up. There is a European agency which is called Eurocontrol that monitors our performance. So I think they are reliable. We have globalized ourselves, whereby we've been recognized by the European Commission as an important partner, very credible, for the fulfillment of the Open Sky, Single Sky Directive. I said I hope we're credible both in operational terms. May I recall that for about 1,600,000 movements recorded in 2012 in the in the Italian airspace, we've had not one single second of delay, but we're also excellent in terms of technical aspect, research and development applied to new technologies and all the technology in terms of air traffic control, and also in terms of investment technologies that are so badly needed for the infrastructure. Infrastructure is not always visible, but for air traffic control, if you think aircrafts fly using radioelectric signals that are highly complex and that are the fruit of a highly skilled technological instruments, and we have an excellent experience in Italy, and it's very costly, millions of euros. So for the first time 4 years ago, thanks to ENAV, this has been recognized at the level of the European Commission, and we've been recognized as fit and fit to receive financing from Europe. We've also been very good at managing our finances. Our balance figures for 2012 are absolutely positive and reassuring for our shareholders in terms of dividends. Notwithstanding the crisis and the lower traffic volume, we are back to the levels of 2005. In 2004, the estimate said that we would have doubled our figures. The doubling of the figures will take place in 2030, actually. Our turnover is 800,000 billions and 46 million operating profits. Now, we are going across our frontiers also on the world scene to export our know-how. We're doing this in emerging countries, those are the booming countries that need a good system to manage their air traffic control, a modern system and effective system, very similar to ours actually. That's the reason why we are working with the government in Mali to improve the government in Kuala Lumpur. And we have a society managed by us in Kuala Lumpur. This is not enough by itself, though. The difficulties faced by the air traffic system nowadays points to the need for a stronger coordination nationally and internationally with the help of the ministry to create a system and to develop a European and a global policy which is really integrated. Obviously, the next steps for infrastructure and transport will be centered around two main axes. Basically, a robust integration between the various modes of transport and, on the one hand, a strong international development, especially European development. So we need a central direction, central guidelines to support the enterprises that are active in the sector. With reference to the national airline sector, may I mention the national plan for airports as an effort to relaunch the sector and relaunch economy in general. In this plan, for instance, Minister, we could better establish the role of every single airport so that we can create a system so that we can avoid inefficient competitiveness between airports to foster internal demand and diversify investments both regionally and internationally and at the level of the various enterprises that are active in the sector. With reference to the international sphere, decision-making levels have shifted and will shift more and more to the central level in Europe and to the global level. A strong support of national institutions is fundamental to take stock of the efforts undertaken by enterprises, especially abroad. Mr. Minister, are we sure that do we still have enough time to fulfill this leadership? Is the minister doing what he should with the European Commission? And then I think we should all ask whether we need organizational and governance models that are more advanced, more efficient, and more ready to meet global challenges. in an effort to compete more and more on the market with levels of efficiency and productivity and effectiveness that are needed to be competitive and reach our objectives. Obviously, we need a greater effort to make more flexible the decision-making processes within enterprises that are competing on the international scene, and hopefully to motivate the employees in all our enterprises in the transport infrastructure. The employees are an invaluable asset for the service that they provide every day. This would allow our system to give a new role to our enterprises with important economic returns and also in terms of employment, and to promote development for the sectors, thus improving our international role. And then I would like to conclude and leave more space to the director and the minister. I think that the system of transport and infrastructure, which is integrated, safe and economic, it's the driver to overcome the crisis, because it is an instrument that then supports all the other sectors. This contributes to modernizing our country. It is really a symbol for Italy, generates employment, reduces the environmental impact, that's again another sensitive issue, and can promote growth in general in the country. In an attempt to summarize all the topics that I have so very quickly listed, I am very sorry for speaking so fast, but unfortunately they say that I have to be very quick. But I would like to summarize by asking the following questions to Director General Rossi and Minister Lupi. For instance, do you think we all need strong guidance to generate a strong system in the world of infrastructure and transport in general, with a focus on intermodality and airline transport in general? Are you aware of all the possibilities that Italy has to take up to be a leader on the European scene? And then maybe we need new organizational models and new methods of governance also in public companies.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garbini. Let's have another very unique case history, that the Port Authority of the city of Trieste. And indeed, they got very good marks because they have a very high growth rate, and they have been, rewarded for that by having higher taxes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting us here.
Presidente del Porto di Trieste.
I'm here to speak on behalf of the Port Authority of Trieste, and I am also the Deputy Chairman of the Assoporti Association. For 2 years, we have been working very actively with a group within the Port Authority without the support of other members, simply by exploiting the very good skills of our managers. For 2 years and a half, and that's why we are here to present them, for we have achieved very successful results, and that is also acknowledged by the press. Plus 47% of container traffic. We supply 100% of Austria, 30% of Germany, 40% of the Czech Republic, 500 oil tankers per year, with an increase in the intermodal traffic is going up, plus 35% of trade with Turkey. We are home port of Costa Crociere, where Grimaldi cruisers are back, and so we have lots of opportunities. The Port of Trieste has a longer shoreline than that of Genoa, 800 meters from the port of Koper in Slovenia, and the labor costs there are indeed much, much lower. For that reason, we decided to lower the port taxes by lowering as much as possible the taxes, which are now close to zero. in 2 years and a half, indeed, and we are a non-profit public body. We are not a limited company, so the mission is that to break even, i.e. We are not there to make profits. However, by giving up the revenues of taxes, we created many spin-offs. Many companies are open there. Many new ship owners are have their ships called at the port. The bottom of the sea is 18 meters, and the first thing is to lower taxes. For that reason, we have a surplus is 13 million euro, which for a port authority is extremely good. For excise taxes and VAT in 2012, 256 million euro, and this year the number will be higher. I'm addressing the director of the Bank of Italy. The director of the Bank of Italy in Trieste told us that we are the only company making profits in Friuli Venezia Giulia. We are in the black. We have no business plan. We simply had an industrial plan referring to the business plans of the companies in the port, so that everything they need, also in terms of investments, we can support them. And we we want to offer an answer in 30 days. So we have become reliable. We have a lot of crane operators in the jetty number 7, which is the biggest in the upper the Mediterranean Sea, 350 people working at weekends. Indeed, a lot of container ships. There was a sort of traffic jam in the Gulf. Therefore, we have to be optimistic. We are not supposed to be entrepreneurs. We simply have to do our job. That means translating into practice the wishes of companies, what they need. So my question, which is addressed to the minister, you stress that the money spent for infrastructure are not an expense, it's an investment, so that we can be ready when the recovery will come. So we are waiting for investments. The latest jetties were financed by the government, for no private company can afford building a new jetty. Still, I'd like to know what is the vision of the minister on the port authorities and the rest of the country. There are 25 of them. All of them have great potentials. Thank you very much, and I wish you good work.
Grazie.
Well, thank you very much. We have heard very interesting ideas. Let's try to get organized. And let me tell you that those who are in charge of economic policies, those who are there to guide the tax and monetary policies, well, they do have a very clear need, i.e. to bring Italy out of the red. Infrastructures are the first natural response. But then also risks emerge. I mean, there is a syndrome affecting all politicians. They are afraid of inaugurating new things, starting works, and then they're leaving them unaccomplished. There are many examples there. It is also necessary to find resources which might be found in Italy, abroad. They might be found by combining private and public funds. We can also resort to international funds, involve new subjects, or we can indeed convene and discuss I'm not going to speak about Eurobonds, but anyway, there might be some European cooperation. So my question to the Director General of the Banca of Italy and the Minister, the following question. Is it possible to set priorities? Do you think that the first priority is to move from the red to the black in the balance sheets, or should be avoiding the fear to start new works? According to a study by the Bank of Italy 2 years ago, indicated that in Italy the investments in infrastructures were not indeed much less than the average of the euro area. However, unfortunately, there are no clear rules as far as the management of funds. The author was Mr. Franco, who indeed is no longer working in the bank. So do you think that he was wrong or right?
Allora, impongo io. La Banca d'Italia viene per prima.
Okay, let's start with the Bank of Italy. Thank you.
Per rispondere alla sua domanda, io partirei proprio dal titolo
di questa serata. In an attempt to reply to your question, let's start from the title of this event, Infrastructure, how can they become an opportunity to overcome the crisis? Now the moderator was asking, obviously, overcoming the crisis, is it a priority? Well, of course, yes, of course it's a priority. And hopefully, I think it's already happening. We are already gradually moving out of the crisis. How is it happening? What can the economic policy do to contribute to the overcoming of this recession? If we look at the world in general, undoubtedly recovery is, growth is coming back. With two buts, two caveats. This world growth has elements of great vulnerability in financial terms, and also this growth is very much dependent upon the American economy, which is really the only one which is visibly growing. Emerging countries, which keep having very high growth rates, the highest of the world, but unfortunately are slowing down. India, Brazil, China. They have a specific type of crisis, implying that they grow less than they could, or they have a problem of excessive debt, for instance, China. There you have to be careful in terms of the strength and the sustainability of this world growth. And then there is all the European predicament on the world scene. I don't know whether you read The Economist of last Friday. There was a cartoon, quite nasty, I must say, against Italy. Quite nasty. You see the train, the convoy of European countries on a train coming from an area, from a very happy period. The bridge collapses, that's the general crisis. The train ends up in very nasty waters and down the bridge, and now it's gradually re-emerging with a huge locomotive, which is Germany, a smaller locomotive, which is France, and then a long series of tiny wagons, including Italy, which is only a tiny wagon. The only big locomotive completely out of water is Germany. The French locomotive is only slightly emerging from the waters. All the others are still struggling. They are still floundering and in great difficulties, and then the whole train after the water will move into a very thick forest, and the title of the cartoon is Slow Growth. This is not true. There are more than two locomotives. All the other countries could be locomotive, including ourselves. But it gives a fairly clear picture of a typical, distinctive problem of the Eurozone. Within that Eurozone, Italy's got its own distinctive features. I mean, we enter this global crisis complete without any responsibility at all in terms of its outset. We were infected, we've been infected by other countries. Obviously, we had 15 years of stagnation and difficulties of our production system behind it, and we had more and more difficulties to face up to competition with emerging countries. And we had it difficult to increase our efficiency. Other countries had put the emphasis on new technologies. So this burden that took us into the crisis led to the fact that the effects of the crisis hit much harder in Italy compared to other countries that had huge responsibilities like the US and the UK in terms of the cause and the inception of the financial crisis. Now we're finding it more difficult to re-emerge out of the crisis, in spite of signs of a slowdown. Maybe we're not growing again, but we are falling much, much slower. There are also positive signs here and there, and I think that reasonably we can be fairly hopeful that around the end of this year, figures, including figures on GDP, will gradually reflect this trend reversal. Having said this, investments are essential, and here I move to the question of infrastructure, especially private investment, let me say, because whenever there's a recession, especially if the recession has been caused by a financial crisis which leads to great uncertainty, or in some cases even panic, then the first reaction of entrepreneurs, mind you, they are the most reactive operator, and usually they stop their investments, including enterprises that have sound enterprises. They stop investing because of the uncertainty. Then, as the fog starts to dissolve, and it could well be the time now, there again, entrepreneurs are the quickest in reacting, because replacement investments to replace obsolete equipment, you cannot possibly discontinue those, not for too long a span of time, because then you're putting at risk the very survival of your enterprise. So they have to resume the invention as long as of the investment, as long as there's critical mass. And if everybody, if the resumption is concomitant, then there is growth. It could actually be just a very quick spasm of survival, or it can be the organized beginning of a long-lasting process. Now, let me say two things in this connection. First, doing business in Italy must be easier. This is something that we keep telling, but then for some reason we tell it and that's it. Anyway, Italy must go back to attract investors. But first of all, Italian investors, but also foreign investors, at the nice place to do business in, as a nice, interesting location where it's interesting to produce for several different reasons. The top quality of our workforce, the beauty of our country, and then a third, it must be very easy to do business, and it's not like that. There are several tax problems. The rules and legislation are extremely cumbersome. They are difficult to interpret. The bureaucracy is terribly burdensome, terribly hostile. The way everything is organized in Italy, the way our bureaucracy is conceived, make it very user-unfriendly. Now, let's come to the role of public investment. This role is fundamental, not so much for macroeconomic reasons, because if you think in the end, public investments are about 1/10 of the total amount of investment, so that's really not the reason. But because if you want good public investments properly done, they can actually re-strengthen the process of change of the entire production fabric of Italy, and especially with reference to infrastructure. Now, for economists and statisticians, find a link between infrastructure and economic growth. Find this link. It's always been a failure. They've never quite found the right measure of this phenomenon, but there are circumstances in which I end up telling to my economist colleagues, maybe common sense is enough. You do not really need a special measure. Sometimes when we ask the question, it is highly more likely that a specific location can thrive because there are good infrastructure, a good road network, airports and ports. Is this one more likely to thrive or an isolated area? I think this is a question that you can reply with a bit of common sense, and I think any child would be able to reply. Sorry, I went on for a very long time, but I wanted to say this at the outset to prepare the reply to your question, because investing in infrastructure with public investment is linked to a problem of quality of the infrastructure itself, which should be useful to increase the productivity of the entire economic system, for instance, by reducing the general costs for enterprises. This is certainly true for transport infrastructure, but not only, because if you think that Italian infrastructure have never quite completed that digitalization process, this jump into modernity. We have a serious problem with the bandwidth, the wideband. There should be the objective. Obviously, objective number one is to contribute to a greater welfare and well-being for citizens. But let's say that another important objective is to increase the productivity of the system. That's the meaning of a good quality infrastructure. And then maybe I will stop here and then go back to it if needed. There's a problem of quality of the process leading to this infrastructure. The problem of how to plan and then build this infrastructure. And here again in Italy we have serious problems.
The floor to the Minister. Well, I think you cannot be blamed that you are afraid of starting new building sites, but I'm sure you found many and accomplished works. Do you think that that is due to the lack of money, or that we should improve the decision-making process? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the dear friends of the Rimini meeting for inviting me again. I also would like to thank the General Director of the Banca of Italy for accepting to come here, and also to accept my personal invitation to come here and talk about concerns that we share. So I do that not only as a member of parliament, but also as a minister. So when you are a minister, you are forced to change words into deeds. I'd like to thank His Excellency Mr. Leuzzi, who is the Monsignore in charge of the members of parliament. Thank you very much for everything you do throughout the year. I indeed listened with great care to your comments and to the questions posed. Well, you highlight a key issue. Since we started at the government, we indeed had very clear ideas about the purpose of the government, which was to be considered an emergency government at a time of emergency. So in times of crisis, you should start from the aims you have, the responsibilities, and the background. So the priority of this government is to do the best to contribute to the growth of Italy, so that we can have again growth restarted in this country. I mean, that was a clear target. Indeed, as Enrico Letta said day, we had not even conceived the idea to become members of the government. Nobody could have thought to be involved in a coalition government. But the challenge is an extraordinary one, so the only answer is that of being realistic, trying to understand how we can contribute. What is the growth? Growth is a very practical term. So from minus, we have to move to plus. That means helping companies grow again. We have to invest well. We have to cut wastes. We have to help families, young persons, those people who lose their job, in particular the older ones. As Minister for Infrastructures, I just wonder what is the contribution that we can give in the short term and also in the mid and long term. We should start from the short term, otherwise we won't be able to work for the mid and long term. To answer one of the questions, one of the problems politicians have is that we are very good at analyzing problems. We attend thousands of meetings. Everyone is perfectly aware of the problems, and they also know the recipes and the prescriptions and what to do. The only thing we can do is to move from words to deeds, i.e. to make institutions closer to citizens. So this is not being afraid of starting new works. Well, we want to do our best to overcome difficulties, to work in a team well aware of the task that we have, and then give clear signs that there is a route to follow. The Bank of Italy people continue to say we should stop complaining. We are a great country. Italy is a great country. We're having difficulties. We are struggling. We made a lot of sacrifices over the past 5 years. But it's workers, it's the families who are available to bear the burden of the crisis. And that's because they have clear ideas of the task which is there for the whole community. So what is the contribution which my ministry can give? First of all, infrastructure should be a good investment. That means that based on what is available, we should indeed make that investment profitable. This is not done by looking for new resources. We should use what we have. One of the problems we have in the sector is this. Often so, we indeed allocate the funds available for many different projects. I mean, if you don't know your destination, you'll never be there. So indeed, we need to have a strategic plans for infrastructures to build the road. So again, funds are allocated. But the first challenge for the government is to move from allotting resources to the accomplishment, to the building of that project. I mean, by building the infrastructures, well, how many people go back to their municipalities, to their constituencies and say, well, we got the money. But, I mean, funds are available. Why are they not used? If we have a priority, why is that not reached? What's happening that prevents the opening up of building sites? So in the Decreto del Fare, and there is, a whole idea. We like to do things. We can do. So we want to get started. So in the Decreto del Fare, for the first time, mention is made to implement infrastructures. It is stated, first of all, we should check the open building yards, the building sites, how much can be spent by the end of this year. If they are not spent by that date, for the first time in history, they can be withdrawn. I mean, it's nonsense continuing spending money for works which are not effective. I mean, if someone is ready to work, we'll take away the resources from the first building site and we'll divert them to the second one. So we set priorities. We've tried indeed to accomplish that by the end of the 31st of December this year. 2 billion euro, that's, just a start. The decree has been signed by myself and Mr. Sacomani, and we have this very important clause. I mean, we'll check by the end of the year whether the money allotted are being used or not. There is a second important point to contribute to growth. It's not only big infrastructures which can contribute to the growth. We also have a medium and small size that works. This country is in an emergency, and we react to that only when the emergency is there. But we have to overhaul and maintain roads, schools, and infrastructures. I mean, we have to care for railways, bridges, schools, and so on. At the same time, we need to be able to offer jobs, because that will have good repercussions at the community level. We'll have the big works, but also the small and medium-sized infrastructures being built at municipality level. 300 million euros have been given to the agency managing the roads in Italy. By mid-October, all the bids have to be accomplished. All tenders will have to be completed to maintain bridges and bypasses. Maybe that's a small signal, but it indicates the direction. What about the schools, the buildings hosting schools? 450 million euros have been allotted, and they have to be spent immediately. These are just small examples to tell you that we all know that investing in infrastructures is good, that creates jobs, can stimulate growth, and increase competition. That is to be done so that everybody in the country, the government and the companies, can be back standing and participating in the economy. We have to indeed eliminate the defects. We need to invest in infrastructures if we really want to relaunch the economy and be competitive, so that those who want to participate can do that. We need to be as competitive as the other countries. If the cost of logistics and of transport is as much as 20% of the whole cost, and in Europe it's 16%, that means that Italian companies are at a disadvantage by 6 percentage points. Then getting loans is much more expensive in Italy than in Germany, and we are both member states of the European Union. Well, that's very difficult to understand. And then the cost of energy is much higher for Italian companies, and it's clear that everyone should do what is they have to do. I mean, that would involve large, medium, and small-sized enterprises. We heard two speakers who spoke about ports and airports. They mentioned excellent infrastructures in this country. There are many things that politics can change. In Germany, a good friend of mine who is here told me that the recovery of the country was based on logistics and transports. If we want to invest in ports, just to say that, I mean, if you have to clean the bottom of a port, it would take 30 years to remove the debris. Indeed, you have to respect the environment, know how to landfill the mud and the sands, and so on. We are here to defend the environment and the life quality. I mean, they can go hand in hand if they are well organized. So politicians are there to simplify procedures, and that has been included in the Decreto del Fare. We stated that ports are a strategic resource for the country. Hence, if they are so, they should perform as strategic resources. We have 8,000 municipalities in Italy. More than 5,000 has less than 5,000 inhabitants. That means that is part of our identity. But we must be able to streamline what's going on. There are 28 port authorities, 90 airports. I mean, this is unacceptable. We should ask regional and local authorities, as well as the national parliament government, to connect all the systems, all the airports and all the ports. So each one of them is not competing with the others. They have to be coordinated. They should not be competing, and they use public resources. This is not acceptable, so we should take up the responsibility to tell our electors that that is unacceptable. We have to be brave. We have to be courageous to network all these infrastructures in a different way. I see the friends from the railways company here. We tend to think that by passing new rules, everything can be solved. I used to be the local minister for infrastructures and ports in Milan. And we discussed for a long time because it was necessary to convince Italian citizens to take the train and not use their cars. How can we do that? By law? No. The rules are just something to indicate what to do. I mean, I used to drive my car from Milan to Bologna. I decided to take the train when, at last, the high-speed trains are functioning in Italy. So if you drive from Milan to Bologna, it takes 2 hours. If you catch a train, it will take 1 hour. So you can pay a low-price ticket and so on. That's the reason why people catch a train and don't drive a car. So you have to show people what is the value of infrastructures. That's a very simple example. We told those of the railways what follows. I mean, we can be competitive in implementing high-speed trains. For that reason, we should be able to invest in a local public transport. I mean, you can move from Turin to Naples in a very short time. Indeed, just think of those who for many years opposed high-speed trains only for ideological reasons. We in the absence of the Legge Obiettivo of 2001 and 2, we would not be able to catch a high-speed train. You know, now going from Milan and Turin, well, it takes just 40 minutes. So I can afford to live in the outskirts of Turin and have my office in Milan. I mean, a good infrastructure can also change the quality of life. This is not demagogic. I mean, those from the Val di Susa say that high-speed is bad. No, it's indeed useful to make Italy go back on track. In 1967,
non è a caso, perché
and indeed it was the last year a gallery was drilled through the mountains to build a road. Freight transport at that time was 19 million tons. And that was over. In 2008, freight transport was 150 million tons. From 67, 19 million, 150 million freight transport in 2008. What about the quality of the environment? How can we defend the environment? By doing nothing, or simply by offering intermodal transport so that from track it will be moved to rail in an effective way? So, very simply put, these are the things that we have to do. This is a very practical and clear signal. So the public sector should do their job, and we should not be afraid of the private sector. We are all together. So if the public sector performs well, it should not be afraid of the private sector. And a private sector is a great resource. The time we are going through, I hope, could help us move from clashes to a time when we all work together. They maybe will be, fighting again in the future, but we should demonstrate that this country can do it also in the field of infrastructures.
Non è facile interpretare il ruolo del piccolo provocatore invece che del moderatore in un contesto come questo, però.
Now, I want to be a bit provocative. Besides moderating, a couple of questions is a bit more provocative. We mentioned the quality of process. Now, all in all, I think we have a general feeling, and it's been said by both of you, that I think what we need it's a shock, something really impressive to go from minus to plus. Now, this huge infrastructure need long-term investment. These are things that happen in the long run. So I wonder whether the private and public, both the private need stability and hope and reliability, knowing that what's been decided won't be changed, etc., stability of regulation. And the perspective of the Bank of Italy and responsible of the insurances, investment of pension funds, of long-term investments, etc., for those who have to go and tell the Japanese or the equity funds in America why they should invest in an Italian infrastructure that have a return in 30 years. What is it that it's still missing, and is it more recommendable to do it now compared to 10 years ago? 3 very quick comments in connection to what Minister Lupi has just said, and in doing them I will also in a way reply to your questions. First of all, you have your volume, your voice pitch, it's really that of a true politician. My voice is hoarse, and I know my voice. It's the subtle voice of a bureaucrat. Anyway, it's also important to complete ongoing works in small infrastructure, also because we, the economists, in a study published by the Bank of Italy, mentioned by the moderator, this has been confirmed that if you go and If you want to find the macroeconomic impact related to an investment, to an expense of public investment, you're more likely to find it in a small infrastructure and in the completing of existing infrastructure. Those huge infrastructure that are obviously essential for the many reasons that we've listed, they require much longer times to be achieved, and they are highly capital intensive, so they employ much more capital than work. So they can contribute to a much lower extent to recovery and growth. And then third comment, and here I move on to reply to the moderator's question, private and public. PPPs, private-public partnerships. It's fundamental. In Italy, there have been very few partnerships between private and public, what everybody calls PPPs. In the European jargon, very little and very much limited to small projects. I think that nowadays in Europe we're going through a difficult moment in terms of the financing of long-term investments, both private and public. This has to do with the global financial crisis and has to do with the crisis of the sovereign default that has badly hit Europe. The ordinary savers and also enterprises are not ready to invest in long-term projects. This is very topical in Europe. It's not an Italian problem, it's a European problem. I think the European Commission undertook initiatives and has come up with proposals. The G20 has been dealing with that as well. I think there are several innovative instruments that are being taken into account. For example, financial instruments that could allow for those who want to finance a long-term infrastructure to have access to capital market without the mediation of banks, which currently, and again it's not just the Italian banks, it's all the European banks, find it much more difficult to accommodate the needs, to accommodate the request of credit because they feel it's very risky. Now, there are several ongoing questions. You have to clarify the role of the state in this. Is it just a regulatory role, or could the state provide guarantees, collaterals, public collaterals? This is an interesting topic in Italy and in many respects. With reference to infrastructure and public investment, and thanks to forms of PPPs, that with these PPPs you can better give voice to these proposals that will soon become concrete proposals to prepare ways and tools for the financing of the long-term investments. Now, looking at all the things that we've heard so far, the two testimonies, the speech by Minister Lupi, and the things that I said a moment ago, I think there's a recurrent problem of rules and legislation, administrative culture, administrative and legal culture. And I think this could be the central problem that we are currently confronted with. I could make many examples, but one among many, also because Minister Lupi dwelled on it, the several decision-making spheres, the different levels of government, and the difficulty of the mechanism of coordination, for instance, between the central state and the regional sphere. those standards and rules and regulation have been ill-designed. I mean, it was not at all intentional. I'm not saying that, but, and I don't necessarily think that's the main problem. The general structure, the general framework of our rules and regulations is very much ill-conceived. And unless we go to the root of the problem, I think it will be hard to solve the problem and do something. Now, let me give the floor back to the Minister to conclude. But once again, let me be provocative. First of all, I think the Authority for Transport has been created. The process has been going on since '94, and now it's the final step. Will eventually something change? Will the number of ports be decreased, the number of airports, the number of agencies managing infrastructures? Will something happen, or will we eventually solve the problem of NIMBY? And then in your initial speech, when you took office, you had been focusing on two objectives. The first had to do with local urban transport, and now you invited Mr. Moretti to do something, to do more, or to speed up what he's doing. And secondly, there was a specific reference to social housing, which is not infrastructure in itself, but let's say that among the various leitmotifs of this month, I think I've read at least every day 10 or 12 headlines that had to do with housing, properties, property taxes, VAT, municipal property tax, etc., the Italian EMU, and social housing. Now, CDP, will it start? What are the initiatives that you are planning to carry on, etc.? So where are we? I would like to reply to this question with great pleasure, and I start with the latest observation of Mr. Rossi in an effort to tell you concrete things and true things. Obviously, otherwise I cannot go on blaming the others. Let me tell you what we've done, what we are planning to do, and then we'll be judged by the yardstick of what we've done. Rules and regulations. I think you'd mentioned the same problem in your first intervention, and you mentioned a word that nobody really likes. We all hate it, actually. Bureaucracy, red tape. I think one of the reasons behind ineffectiveness and delays is the cost of bureaucracy, the ineffectiveness of bureaucracy for enterprises. I remember a research of the Foundation for Subsidiarity for SMEs, and I remember very clearly that upon the question, in a moment of crisis, what do SMEs actually need? What is their request for the state? It struck me very much that the first reply, it wasn't money or resources, but rather less bureaucracy, less obstacles. Please give us less bureaucracy. With reference to rules and regulations, not just that we need to change them, we need to change them radically. We have far too many rules and regulations, most of which are confused, and most of them are very badly implemented. And they have an intrinsic defect. Then when we do those rules, we then end up changing them all the times, and then we make them retroactive. A total disaster. And do you know what is the reason behind this? I take full responsibility for what I'm saying. It's an educational problem. It's the weakness of those who are involved in politics and the weakness of those who are implementing the rule. Because you think that the rule is replacing yourself in your ability to take up your responsibilities, to have the rule complied with, and then you add a new rule, and then you end up in a disaster, in a jungle of rules. I did something very simple. Somebody had took fun of me, but then you have to start from the grassroots, from the people. In the driving regulation, sometimes you think that you have to punish those who do something wrong, and never by educating drivers. First of all, you educate and train, because you're dealing with people. Obviously, punishing, applying sanctions should always be the end effect, should be the last step. You cannot say, now You cannot apply a sanction and then a sanction for the sanction. We're doing here politics in the most noble sense, and we should remember that this has to do with that this is linked to our responsibility. So, if you drive properly, always remember that sanction is not a punishment. It is simply meant to remember that you did something wrong and that you can do things properly from now on. So that's just a small signal to say, listen, we haven't taken away any points from your driving license. And then you can, if you pay your sanction immediately, you'll have a discount, 30% off. I think this is an innovative thing and a good thing for the relationship between the citizens and the state. When I was municipal councillor in Milan for town planning, many problems, we could have changed the world, we could go to our citizens and promise that we would change everything, but there were holes in the roads, and you have to start by solving this simple problem. Close the hole in the street so that if you want to retrieve the trust of the citizens, and then do the great infrastructure. Very few rules and regulations, clear and clear-cut and never retroactive, and clearly showing the way. That's what we are attempting to do. We have very little time. In our recent decree, which is called Decreto del Fare, we have signs of this, that we're taking the right, and we're doing in the right direction by taking the right steps. Second reflection, again, the Transport Authority. My task, and let us ask, is to take responsibility. My dear friend, the journalists, they were asking me, when will you conclude the Transport Authority? I said, by the 30th of July. So whenever, if you want to do some things, you do them. The Parliament played its role. We selected a few people. The value for this Transport Authority is a very high value. We have an agency that is like a third subject in the complete management of the infrastructural network to liberalize the market, the fees, etc. It's important. If you are brave enough to take a decision, if you show the way, then you can stick to deadlines. I think it will be very helpful. Then it will depend on the people. We cannot replace the responsibility of who will be in the government then. But then we can give the signal and say that the authority now exists. It's an important reference point. We'll be able to have a better dialogue between citizens, network operators, operators in market, etc. I think these challenges will be faced. And then the problem of housing, or the property of a home for the Italian, which I think it's fundamental, because maybe we have different opinions of that, but then I want to say and repeat that Italy is different, it's different from other countries. We are deeply rooted in Europe. We are members of the European Union, and there's a beautiful exhibition on this. We know why Europe was created. It was created also because with the richness of diversity. In terms of housing, we have a distinctive feature. Nobody else in Europe sees 80% of Italian families owning their home, their house. This is a fact. You cannot just disrupt it simply because in Germany it's different or in France. Let's start from what we have. 80% are homeowners in Italy. Why is it that we have this distinctive feature that is as closely linked to the cultural identity of us Italians? No matter how rich or poor you are, no matter how big your family, the home is the place where the family feels safe and sound and welcome. And workers, like the average Italian, will work his entire life to buy a home, a place to be. So on this, let's forget about all ideologies and see the concrete effects of a measure like the one we've had. Chesterton would certainly not have been in favor of a tax like the IMU, the municipal property tax, because he had a different conception of men. Now, what is the critical issue that will be dealt with next week? Looking at reality, not at what we think about reality, it's more than obvious that this specific municipal tax, which is called IMU, we have to forget about it. It has led to recession. It was meant for the good. It was meant for a noble purpose. This is the situation. We have to go beyond that and send different signals that have to go in the opposite direction. This is our mindset. And this is, I think, that the tax leverage, it's important. The building sector, all the building industry, it's a fundamental sector, but this is, I mean, everybody keeps saying the same. If Italy wants to continue being a large industrial country, or if you want to change our nature, become a service country, but here we're not in London, we are the second manufacturing country in Europe. I think that the strong fabric of SMEs, which is the backbone of our country, I firmly believe in that. I firmly believe that we have to invest in that. We want a strong manufacturing industrial country. And if we want this, then the driver can only be, as usual, all the sector that revolves around the housing, the building infrastructure for building manufacture. It's the entire sector. It's not the very single sectors. And the problem is not just for homeowners, for those who want to build houses, or just the problem about mortgages. It's not like there's a long sector that reaches single people and families. So we now have a measure, 65% for energy bonus, energy benefit, and also we have a provision establishing that you cannot just restructure your house, but also the family that might need a new kitchen, a new furniture, a new sofa. So why don't we help people to do this? If you think that it's helpful, if you think that this can help to relaunch the economy, and just mentioning examples at random, but just to give you an idea that politics with good ideas can adapt itself to very concrete things. But in reply to your question, let me say the following. I think that next week we cannot just deal with the problem of the IMU or VAT. We also have to give a strong signal to the topic of the housing problem in general, taking into account the problems that are still pending and the problems that we are currently facing. Access to credit, you know, it's impossible to have access. Banks simply do not lend money. Things what we had in 2008, 2007, you would just go to the bank and he said you wanted to borrow money. He said, I want 80. They would give you 100 or 120. Is it still the same? Not really. The situation has changed. Families, young people who want to get married. The 35-year-old that has a precarious job or that has a contract job doesn't get a mortgage. And also enterprises that want to invest, builders who want to invest, banks are not lending money. So if you are an industrial manufacturing country and we are dealing with a pillar, with possibly the most important sector of our economy, otherwise what I'm saying is nonsense. But if we want to manage with the resources at our disposal this topic to re-establish access to credit, guaranteeing that banks are again able to lend money in a difficult predicament as this one to the two categories, families and enterprises. This is what we need. This is what we have to enact by applying the instrument that we call in Italy Cassa Depositi Prestiti. Now, SMEs, investors, infrastructure should all benefit of this Cassa Depositi Prestiti. I'm working on it, by the way. I'm working on the provision that the decree that will be passed next week. I think we have to send out this important signal. Then we have to continue with other important signals, now the situation is so serious that there are families. Now, and the Banca of Italy had given interesting figures to say how dignified our country is, how proud we are, how serious we are. If you have a mortgage and you have to repay your mortgage, people do pay the monthly installments of your mortgage to the banks. Sometimes people simply are unable to repay their debt. And there have been studies on this, and I think that on the topic of mortgages, and the ability to repay your debt within the deadline, to pay the monthly installments, etc. We have to renew the system, and we have to think that the state will have to come in and help those families that are unable to repay their debt. We have to establish a system that can come in and help in situations of emergency. And also we have to introduce a new element, talking to young couples, young families who need to buy their first home. We need a specific law on this. So the weak reference points are not just families or young families and young couples, but also we have to establish a clear yardstick, maybe people below the age of 35 who have a contract job, not a fixed employment. They want to buy a home and they need to have guarantees, they need to be helped, they need to be able to have access to credit. Social housing and all the other topic would be then the rest. If next week we are able to send a signal on the municipal property tax, then if we overcome the IMU, the service tax, cancelling the IMU for first homes. Now, how can you possibly ask people to pay the IMU on a house that has not even been sold? I mean, in some cases, we've asked entrepreneurs to pay the IMU on entrepreneurs that had a second home that has not been sold, and we charge them the IMU. It's as if you ask somebody to pay taxes on cars that have not been sold. And then we complain that citizens have no longer trust politicians. So there are many things that we need to do. Hopefully next week the majority of these provisions will be approved and then enacted. Please apologize, I took longer than expected, but this was a different approach to infrastructure. We could have mentioned the golden rule and many other things, but I think we've said that what really matters. A new approach with more responsibility. We have to say that will be successful if everybody plays their part. The entrepreneur should be able to play the entrepreneur. Workers and leaders must be workers and leaders, and politicians will be politicians. If we start from this, and there's evidence of this already. The Bank of Italy is confirming, and maybe we'll be able to bring back hope, because hope, I think, is the key issue, is the key word. Very often people made fun of us, saying that we were lacking optimism, that we were not realistic when we said we need more hope. But then again, talking about the emergency of the human person, we're back to square one. Without hope, you cannot go anywhere. I mean, reality, it's always a positive challenge for each and every one of us. For somebody like myself, who is now a minister, for some of you who are possibly losing their jobs, for those of you who are entrepreneurs, or for those of you who are work at the port authority and have to manage the problems like those working in Lampedusa. Admiral Angrisano knows very well the extraordinary job that they've done to welcome these desperate people fleeing from Africa, and we always have to understand the drama of life for everyone. Nevertheless, we have to safeguard our coastline, guarantee that our rules are respected, and also those who come to us will have to comply with our rules. Thank you very much.